The notification sound from my phone pierced through the hospital's silence like a knife. As I lay there with my leg elevated, wrapped in bandages and throbbing with pain, I reached for the device with trembling fingers. What I saw on that screen would shatter everything I thought I knew about my own son. There, uploaded just 2 hours after my accident, was a video titled, "Mom's Epic Fail Down the Stairs, Gone Wrong," with my face frozen mid-fall as the thumbnail. The view count was already climbing past 50,000. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Patricia Wells, and until that moment in the hospital room, I believed I had raised a compassionate, loving son. I was 54 years old, a single mother, who had poured every ounce of her being into ensuring my boy Marcus had everything he needed to succeed in life. I worked double shifts as a nurse at Denver General, sacrificed my own social life, and even took out loans to buy him the expensive camera equipment he claimed he needed for his, quote, content creation career. I thought I was investing in his future. I had no idea I was funding my own humiliation. The fall itself had been an accident, a genuine moment of terror that could have killed me. I had been carrying a heavy box of Marcus's old textbooks up to the attic, books I was planning to donate because he'd moved back home after college and needed the space cleared out. The wooden step, worn smooth by decades of use in our old Victorian house, had given way beneath my foot. I remember the sickening sensation of gravity taking hold, the way time seemed to slow as I tumbled backward down 14 wooden steps, my body hitting each one with a nauseating thud. What I didn't know was that Marcus had been filming a gaming live stream in his room when it happened. His setup faced the hallway, and his chat had apparently heard the commotion. Instead of turning off the camera and rushing to help me, he had grabbed his phone and followed the sounds of my groans and desperate calls for help. While I lay at the bottom of the stairs, disoriented and bleeding from a gash on my forehead, my 23-year-old son stood over me with his camera rolling, providing commentary for his audience. "Oh man, guys, this is insane," I could hear his voice saying in the video as I watched it from my hospital bed. "My mom just totally ate it on the stairs. Look at this damage." The camera panned across my prone form like I was some kind of spectacle, some piece of content to be consumed and discarded. I watched myself trying to sit up, confusion written across my face as I realized what he was doing. I watched my own son prioritize his online audience over my well-being. The comments section was a cesspool of laughing emojis and cruel jokes. "Your mom's a klutz," one person had written. "Hope she's okay, but this is hilarious," said another. A few people had called it disturbing, questioning why he was filming instead of helping, but those voices were drowned out by the majority, who treated my pain like entertainment. Marcus had pinned his own comment at the top. "Don't worry, fam, she's fine. Moms are tougher than they look. Remember to smash that like button." I had raised this person. I had sung him lullabies when he couldn't sleep, held him when he cried over broken friendships, celebrated every small victory throughout his childhood. I had worked night shifts and weekend doubles to afford his gaming setup, his editing software, his endless requests for newer and better equipment. When his father walked out on us when Marcus was 12, I had become both mother and father, cheerleader and disciplinarian, provider and nurturer. And this was how he saw me. Not as his mother, not even as a human being, but as content for his channel. The worst part wasn't even the video itself, though watching my own child exploit my vulnerability felt like being stabbed with a rusty blade. The worst part was realizing that this wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment. As I scrolled through his recent uploads while lying in that sterile hospital room, I discovered an entire catalog of content featuring me without my knowledge or consent. There were compilation videos titled "Living with My Boomer Mom," where he had secretly recorded me struggling with technology, mocking my confusion when I couldn't figure out his smart TV or when I asked him to help me understand some new app. He had filmed me in my pajamas during my morning routine, focusing on my bedhead and tired face as I stumbled to the kitchen for coffee, adding sarcastic captions about suburban mom life. There were videos of me singing along to old songs in the car, with him adding commentary about how cringe it was to watch someone from my generation try to be cool. He had even uploaded footage of me crying while watching a sad movie, with a title that read, "When Your Mom Gets Too Emotional Therapy Session Needed?" Each video felt like a small betrayal, but together they painted a picture of complete disrespect and exploitation. I wasn't his mother in these videos. I was a character in his show, a punchline in his comedy routine, a way for him to generate revenue and online engagement. The comment sections were filled with people my own age expressing sympathy, saying things like, "I hope my kids never treat me this way," and "This is so disrespectful." But there were just as many younger viewers laughing along, treating my daily struggles and private moments like entertainment designed for their consumption. As I lay there with my broken ribs and sprained ankle, scrolling through video after video of my own son turning my life into a joke, I felt something inside me crack that had nothing to do with my physical injuries. This wasn't just teenage rebellion or a lack of maturity. Marcus was 23 years old, a grown man who had made conscious decisions to humiliate and exploit the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him. He had monetized my pain, my vulnerability, my love for him. The money aspect made it even more sickening. I could see from his analytics, which he had foolishly left public, that these videos were generating significant revenue. The stairfall video alone would probably earn him several $1,000s in ad revenue and sponsorship opportunities. He was literally profiting from my suffering, building his brand on the foundation of my humiliation. Every view, every like, every share was money in his pocket, and another nail in the coffin of my dignity. I had always known that Marcus could be thoughtless and self-centered, traits I had attributed to his generation's relationship with social media and their need for constant validation. I had made excuses for his behavior, telling myself that he was just young and would grow out of it. When he dropped out of his expensive business program to pursue influencer marketing, I had supported him financially and emotionally, even though I didn't understand his career choice. When he moved back home at 23 because he couldn't afford his own place, I had welcomed him with open arms and charged him no rent. I had been the epitome of the supportive mother, the woman who believed in her child's dreams even when they seemed unrealistic or frivolous. I had worked extra shifts to help pay for his equipment, had driven him to networking events, had even appeared in a few of his early videos when he asked me to. I thought I was being a good sport, a cool mom who could laugh at herself and support her son's ambitions. I didn't realize I was being groomed to become his primary source of content, his personal court jester whose suffering would fuel his success. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Every time I had stumbled or made a mistake in recent months, Marcus had been there with his camera. Every time I had been vulnerable or emotional, he had found a way to capture it and transform it into entertainment. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was his unpaid performer, his content generator, his meal ticket. And the worst part was that I had been
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
complicit in my own exploitation, so desperate to maintain a connection with my son that I had allowed him to turn me into a caricature. The nurses kept checking on me throughout that first night, monitoring my concussion, and making sure my pain levels were manageable. But no amount of medication could touch the ache in my chest as I realized that the person I loved most in the world saw me as nothing more than a source of entertainment for strangers on the internet. Every caring gesture I had made, every sacrifice I had endured, every moment of pride I had felt watching him grow up, felt tainted by this new knowledge. Marcus hadn't even visited me in the hospital. He had called once, briefly, to ask if I was going to be okay, and whether I needed him to handle anything at home. His tone was casual, distracted, like he was checking items off a to-do list rather than talking to his injured mother. When I had gently mentioned that I had seen the video, he had laughed it off. "Come on, Mom. You know I didn't mean anything by it. It's just content. Everyone knows it's all in good fun." Good fun. My broken ribs and the gash on my head were good fun. My terror as I fell down those stairs was good fun. The humiliation of being turned into a viral meme was good fun. I had hung up the phone feeling more alone than I ever had, even during those dark months after his father had abandoned us. At least then, I had felt like Marcus and I were a team, facing the world together. Now I realized that I had been facing the world alone while he filmed me doing it. The second day in the hospital brought more revelations as I continued to investigate the scope of Marcus's content. I discovered that he had multiple revenue streams built around exploiting our relationship. He had affiliate marketing deals with products that he claimed I used and loved, even though I had never heard of most of them. He sold merchandise with my image on it, including t-shirts with screenshots of my most embarrassing moments and coffee mugs featuring my confused facial expressions. He had even created a Patreon account where subscribers could pay monthly fees to access exclusive Patricia content, including longer videos of my private moments and behind-the-scenes footage of our daily life. People were literally paying money to watch me live my life, to see me in my most vulnerable states, to laugh at my pain and confusion. I was being commodified, and I hadn't even known it. The betrayal felt suffocating. Every memory I had of our relationship was now suspect. Had he been genuine when he asked me to help him with his early videos? Or was he already planning to exploit me? When he suggested we watch movies together, was it because he wanted to spend time with his mother, or because he was hoping I would have an emotional reaction he could film? When he asked about my day, was it out of love and interest, or was he mining for content ideas? I thought about all the times I had felt grateful that Marcus still wanted to spend time with me, even as a young adult. So many of my friends complained that their children never called, never visited, never included them in their lives. I had felt lucky that my son still enjoyed my company, still sought out my opinions, still treated me like an important part of his world. Now I understood that I wasn't important to him as a person. I was important to him as a resource, a character in his ongoing show, a way to generate the controversy and relatability that his audience craved. The financial implications were staggering as I began to understand the scope of his operation. Based on the view counts and engagement rates I could see, Marcus was probably earning more money from exploiting me than I made working 60-hour weeks as a nurse. While I was destroying my body and sacrificing my health to keep us afloat financially, he was building a career on my humiliation. Every dollar he made was a dollar that came from my pain, my embarrassment, my private moments being turned into public entertainment. I began to understand why he had been so resistant to finding his own place, or getting a bunty, traditional job. Why would he need employment when he had me? I was his business model, his content strategy, his source of passive income. As long as he lived in my house and had access to my daily life, he had unlimited material to mine for his channels. I wasn't his mother. I was his unwitting business partner in an enterprise I had never agreed to join. The realization that I had been enabling this exploitation for months, maybe even years, was almost too much to bear. Every time I had agreed to appear in one of his videos, every time I had laughed along with his jokes at my expense, every time I had supported his career financially and emotionally, I had been feeding the machine that was destroying my dignity and autonomy. I had been so desperate to maintain a relationship with my son that I had allowed him to transform me into a product. By the third day, I was physically ready to go home, but emotionally I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. I could continue pretending that Marcus's behavior was acceptable, that exploiting my vulnerabilities was just harmless fun, that being turned into internet entertainment was the price of maintaining a relationship with my child. Or I could acknowledge that what he was doing was fundamentally wrong and take steps to protect myself, even if it meant risking our relationship. The choice felt impossible. Marcus was my only family, the only person I had left in the world. His father had abandoned us, my parents had died years ago, and I had few close friends due to my demanding work schedule and my focus on raising my son. If I confronted Marcus about his behavior and he chose his online career over our relationship, I would truly be alone. But if I continued to allow him to exploit me, I would be sacrificing my dignity, my privacy, and my self-worth for the illusion of connection. As I prepared to leave the hospital, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront Marcus directly, at least not yet. Instead, I was going to gather evidence, understand the full scope of what he had been doing, and then make an informed decision about how to proceed. I was going to approach this like the problem-solving nurse I had trained to be, methodically and strategically rather than emotionally and impulsively. I had spent 30 years taking care of other people, first as a mother, and then as a healthcare professional. I had devoted my life to nurturing, healing, and supporting others, often at the expense of my own needs and well-being. But lying in that hospital bed, watching my own son profit from my suffering, I realized that I had never truly taken care of myself. I had never prioritized my own dignity, my own boundaries, my own right to privacy and respect. That was about to change. Marcus had live-streamed my fall down the stairs, but he had no idea that he was about to experience a fall of his own. And when he did, I would be the one holding the camera. The ride home from the hospital felt like traveling through a foreign country. Every familiar landmark looked different now, tainted by my new understanding of how Marcus viewed our life together. The old oak tree where I used to push him on a tire swing when he was 7 now seemed like just another prop in his ongoing performance. The corner store where I had bought him candy after school victories was probably just another location he had scouted for potential content opportunities. When the taxi pulled into our driveway, I could see Marcus through his bedroom window, illuminated by the blue glow of his multiple monitors. He was gesticulating wildly, clearly in the middle of another live stream, probably entertaining his audience with stories about his clumsy mother who had provided him with such premium content just days before. The sight of him performing while I struggled to climb out of the car with my crutches made my stomach turn with a mixture of revulsion and heartbreak. The house felt different when I finally made it inside. The familiar sounds of Marcus's gaming setup seemed louder, more intrusive. I could hear fragments of his commentary floating down from upstairs, and I found myself straining to listen, wondering if he was talking about me again, if my injury was still being used as entertainment for his faceless audience. Every creak of the floorboards above my head made me tense, knowing that he might be recording, that any sound I made could become part of his next video. I settled into the living room couch with my laptop, still moving carefully due to my injuries, and began what would become the most painful investigation of my life. I created anonymous accounts on all the platforms where Marcus had a presence, allowing me to see his content from the perspective of a regular viewer rather than his mother. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The rabbit hole went deeper than I had realized during my limited hospital research. Marcus had been documenting our life together for over 2 years, creating an intricate narrative, where I was the bumbling supporting character in his story. He had filmed me during some of my most private moments, including times when I had been grieving the loss of my own mother, when I had been stressed about mounting medical bills, when I had been crying over his father's complete absence from our lives. There was an entire series called Patricia's Life Lessons, where he had secretly recorded conversations where I had tried to give him advice about relationships, money management, and career planning. He had edited these conversations to make me sound naive, out of touch, and ridiculous. My genuine attempts to guide and support him had been transformed into comedy sketches, where I was the punchline, the foolish older woman who didn't understand the modern world. The comments on these videos were particularly devastating. Viewers had created inside jokes about my mannerisms, my expressions, my way of speaking. They had given me cruel nicknames and mocked everything from my appearance to my profession. Some comments were so vicious that I had to close the laptop and take breaks, overwhelmed by the casual cruelty of strangers who felt entitled to judge and ridicule me based on secretly recorded footage. What made it worse was realizing how carefully Marcus had cultivated this image of me. He had never posted videos where I was happy, confident, or successful. He had never shared footage of me excelling at my job, helping my patients, or demonstrating the competence and compassion that had earned me respect in my professional life. Instead, he had cherry-picked only the moments where I appeared confused, frustrated, or vulnerable, creating a deliberately distorted portrait of who I was as a person. I discovered sponsored content where Marcus promoted products by claiming I had tried them and failed spectacularly. There were videos of him surprising me with various gadgets and services, filming my genuine confusion and discomfort as I tried to use things I had never asked for. These weren't organic moments of a son sharing gifts with his mother. They were calculated content creation sessions designed to generate revenue while making me look foolish. The financial records I could access through his public analytics were staggering. Marcus was earning more money from exploiting me than I made as an experienced nurse with 3 decades of experience. He had turned my pain, confusion, and private moments into a 6-figure income stream. While I worked night shifts and double overtime to support both of us, he was building wealth by systematically destroying my dignity. I found merchandise featuring my face on items I would never have consented to. There were coffee mugs with screenshots of me looking confused, t-shirts with my most embarrassing quotes taken out of context, and even mouse pads featuring photos of me that had been edited to emphasize my worst angles. People were wearing my humiliation, literally purchasing products that allowed them to carry my embarrassment with them throughout their daily lives. The Patreon content was the most violating discovery of all. Subscribers were paying monthly fees to access extended footage of my private life, including videos of me sleeping, changing clothes in what I thought was the privacy of my own home, and having private phone conversations with friends and healthcare providers. Marcus had installed hidden cameras throughout our house, turning our shared living space into a surveillance network designed to capture content for paying customers. Reading through the Patreon comments made me feel physically sick. Subscribers discussed my body, my personal habits, my private conversations as if I were a character in a reality television show, rather than a real person with feelings and rights. They speculated about my health, my relationships, my finances, treating the most intimate details of my life like entertainment designed for their consumption. Some subscribers had developed what could only be described as parasocial relationships with me, writing long comments about how much they enjoyed watching my daily routines, how relatable my struggles were, how much my presence meant to them. The irony was devastating. These strangers felt connected to me based on secretly recorded footage, while my own son saw me only as a content-generating resource. I realized that Marcus had been strategically creating situations designed to capture footage of me at my worst. The expensive smart home devices he had installed weren't gifts to make my life easier. They were recording equipment disguised as presents. The times he had offered to help me with technology weren't genuine attempts to assist me. They were setups designed to capture my confusion and frustration for his audience. The workout equipment he had bought for the basement, claiming he wanted us to get healthy together, was positioned to provide optimal camera angles for filming my struggles with exercise. The cooking classes he had suggested we take together were opportunities to record my mistakes and mishaps in the kitchen. Every seemingly thoughtful gesture had been calculated to generate content while maintaining plausible deniability about his true motivations. I spent hours going through his direct messages and community posts, discovering that he had built an entire online persona around being the long-suffering son of a difficult mother. He complained about my neediness, my emotional instability, my inability to adapt to modern life, as if these were factual descriptions rather than deliberate character assassination. His followers offered him sympathy and advice for dealing with his quote-and-some mother, never knowing that he was the one exploiting and manipulating the relationship. The most painful discovery was a private forum, where Marcus and other content creators shared strategies for exploiting family members without their knowledge. They discussed camera placement, editing techniques, and ways to manipulate situations to create more dramatic content. They treated their family members like unpaid actors in their shows, sharing tips for capturing private moments and personal struggles for public consumption. Marcus had posted detailed advice about how to film family members without consent, how to edit footage to maximize comedic impact, and how to deflect criticism by claiming everything was just harmless fun. He had become a thought leader in the family exploitation genre, teaching other creators how to monetize their relationships while avoiding legal consequences. Reading his posts in this forum revealed the calculated nature of his behavior. This wasn't thoughtless social media use or generational differences in privacy expectations. This was systematic exploitation carried out by someone who understood exactly what he was doing and the harm it could cause. Marcus knew that his content was hurting me, and he had made the conscious choice to continue because it was profitable. I found conversations where he discussed specific plans for future content involving me. He had been planning to film my reaction to learning about his content, believing that my distress would make for engaging footage. He had discussed strategies for escalating conflicts with me to create more dramatic content, treating our relationship like a scripted reality show, where he controlled the narrative. The forum posts revealed that Marcus had been coaching other creators on how to gaslight family members who complained about being filmed, how to make them feel like they were overreacting or being overly sensitive. He had shared techniques for maintaining access to family members while continuing to exploit them, treating emotional manipulation like a business strategy. I discovered that he had been planning to move me into an assisted living facility, not because I needed care, but because he believed filming my adjustment to institutional living would generate significant viewer engagement. He had researched facilities with lax privacy policies, looking for places where he could continue documenting my life even after removing me from our shared home. The conversations revealed his long-term strategy for my life, treating me like a character whose story arc he could control and manipulate for maximum entertainment value. He had discussed the potential content opportunities that would come with my aging, my eventual health decline, and even my death, speaking about my mortality like it was a business opportunity rather than the end of his mother's life. By the time I finished reading through the forum, I understood that Marcus had never seen me as his mother in any meaningful sense. I was a character in his show, a resource to be mined, a product to be marketed. Every interaction we had was filtered through his calculation of its content potential. Every conversation was an opportunity to gather material. Every vulnerable moment was a chance to create engaging footage. The house felt like a prison now that I understood the extent of the surveillance. Every room contained hidden cameras. Every conversation was potentially being recorded. Every private moment was at risk of becoming public entertainment. I had been living in a panopticon designed by my own son, trapped in a surveillance state, where I was simultaneously the prisoner and the product. I spent the rest of that week moving through our house like a ghost, hyper-aware of every camera angle, every recording device, every potential moment that could be captured and transformed into content. I found myself performing normalcy, even in private, afraid that any display of emotion or vulnerability would be turned into entertainment for Marcus's audience. The isolation was suffocating. I couldn't confide in friends about what was happening because I didn't know if our conversations were being recorded. I couldn't express my feelings in my own home because I knew that any emotional display would likely become content for Marcus's subscribers. I was trapped in a space where I had no privacy, no agency, and no control over how my life was being presented to the world. I began to understand how thoroughly Marcus had isolated me from potential support systems. He had discouraged me from dating, claiming he needed me to focus on supporting his career. He had criticized my friendships, suggesting that my friends were jealous of our close relationship or didn't understand his generation. He had convinced me that our relationship was special, that other mothers weren't as cool or understanding as I was, while simultaneously documenting my trust and openness for public ridicule. The gaslighting had been so subtle and effective that I had internalized his narrative about our relationship. I had believed that I was lucky to have a son who still wanted to spend time with me, who included me in his projects, who treated me like a friend rather than just a parent. I had been grateful for his attention, never realizing that his interest in my life was purely extractive. During that week of discovery, Marcus continued his normal routine as if nothing had changed. He gamed, streamed, and created content while I recovered from injuries he had caused through his negligence. He never asked about my pain levels, never offered to help with household tasks I was struggling to complete with my mobility limitations, never acknowledged that his decision to film rather than help had directly contributed to the severity of my injuries. His casual indifference to my suffering was almost more painful than the exploitation itself. Even if he saw me primarily as content rather than as his mother, basic human decency should have compelled him to show some concern for my well-being. Instead, he treated my presence in the house like background noise, relevant only when it served his content creation needs. I realized that I had been living with a stranger who happened to share my DNA. The son I thought I knew, the young man I had sacrificed everything to support and nurture, didn't actually exist. In his place was a calculating content creator who had weaponized my love and trust to build a career on my humiliation. The Marcus who had hugged me when I cried, who had thanked me for my sacrifices, who had claimed to appreciate everything I had done for him, was just another performance. He had learned to mimic affection and gratitude because it kept me compliant and available for exploitation. Every tender moment between us had been contaminated by his hidden agenda. As the week progressed, I found myself studying Marcus like a puzzle I needed to solve. I watched his patterns, his behaviors, his reactions, trying to understand how I had missed the signs of his true nature for so long. I began to see the calculation behind gestures I had interpreted as spontaneous affection. I recognized the manipulation tactics he used to keep me emotionally available while maintaining distance when it served his purposes. I also began researching legal options for protecting myself from continued exploitation. The laws around recording family members without consent were complex and varied by jurisdiction, but I started to understand what rights I might have and what evidence I would need to pursue legal action if necessary. The knowledge that I was gathering evidence changed something fundamental in how I moved through our shared space. I was no longer just Marcus's unwitting victim. I was an investigator building a case, a strategist planning my next move, a woman reclaiming her agency after years of having it systematically eroded. By the end of that week, I had made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I was going to fight back. Not with the emotional pleading or maternal guilt that Marcus would expect and could easily deflect, but with the same calculating precision he had used against me. He had taught me, through his own actions, that in his world everything was content, and everyone was a potential audience. He was about to learn that I could play that game too. And unlike him, I actually had something worth fighting for. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it began with a single realization as I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence of my son's betrayal. I had spent my entire adult life being reactive, responding to other people's needs and expectations rather than setting my own agenda. Marcus had exploited this tendency, knowing that I would absorb his treatment without retaliation because that's who I had always been. But pain has a way of crystallizing priorities, and as I stared at the hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector above my head, I decided that version of myself was finished. My first move was deceptively simple. I started documenting everything, but not in the way Marcus might expect. While he had turned my life into entertainment without my consent, I began creating my own record of what was really happening in our house. I purchased a small, discreet recording device and began capturing our interactions, his casual cruelty, his calculated manipulation of situations for content creation. The difference was crucial. Marcus recorded me without permission to exploit my vulnerabilities for profit. I recorded our interactions with full knowledge of what I was doing, creating evidence of his systematic abuse and exploitation. Every conversation where he dismissed my concerns, every moment where he prioritized his audience over my well-being, every instance of him treating me like a prop rather than his mother, was carefully documented. I also began reaching out to other parents who had been exploited by their children for social media content. The forums where Marcus shared his strategies had inadvertently connected me to a network of victims who had suffered similar treatment. Many of them were mothers like me, women who had supported their children's online careers, only to discover they had become unpaid performers in their own humiliation. These conversations were both heartbreaking and empowering. I met Sarah, whose daughter had filmed her during chemotherapy treatments for a series called Cancer Mom Chronicles. I spoke with Robert, whose son had documented his struggle with depression following his wife's death, turning genuine grief into monetized content. There was Maria, whose twin boys had live-streamed her having a panic attack, complete with commentary about her mental health issues. Each story reinforced the same pattern. Adult children who had weaponized their parents' love and trust, turning family relationships into business opportunities, while maintaining plausible deniability about their true intentions. They all used the same deflection tactics Marcus employed, claiming their content was, quote, just for fun, or celebrating family life, while systematically destroying their parents' dignity and privacy. But these conversations also revealed something Marcus hadn't anticipated. Several of these parents had fought back successfully. They had pursued legal action, exposed their children's exploitation, and reclaimed control over their own narratives. They shared strategies, legal resources, and most importantly, they demonstrated that resistance was possible. I learned about revenge porn laws that could apply to non-consensual filming, privacy statutes that protected against surveillance in private homes, and elder abuse regulations that covered financial exploitation by family members. The legal landscape was more favorable than I had initially realized, especially for cases involving systematic exploitation and hidden surveillance. Armed with this knowledge, I began building my case methodically. I documented every camera in our house, every piece of recording equipment Marcus had installed under the guise of gifts or home improvements. I cataloged every video where I appeared without consent, every piece of merchandise featuring my image, every revenue stream built on my exploitation. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had turned our home into a production studio, and me into his primary content source, all while maintaining the facade of a loving son who simply wanted to share his life online. The disconnect between his public persona as a devoted child and his private behavior as a calculating exploiter was stark and well documented. While I gathered evidence, I also began making practical changes to protect myself. I found and disabled the hidden cameras I could locate, though I suspected there were others I hadn't discovered. I changed my routines to be less predictable, making it harder for Marcus to stage situations for content creation. I started spending more time away from the house, limiting his access to my daily life. These changes didn't go unnoticed. Marcus became increasingly agitated as his content opportunities diminished. He started trying to provoke reactions from me, creating conflicts and dramatic situations he could film. When I refused to engage with his manipulation tactics, he escalated his efforts, becoming more desperate and obvious in his attempts to generate content. I watched him struggle with the reality that I was no longer an easy target, no longer the compliant mother who would absorb his treatment without resistance. He tried the same gaslighting techniques that had worked before, telling me I was being paranoid, oversensitive, ungrateful for everything he had done to include me in his success. But the spell was broken. I could see his manipulation for what it was, and it no longer had power over me. The turning point came when Marcus attempted to stage what he clearly intended to be his most ambitious content yet. He had invited several other content creators to our house for what he described as a, quote, collaboration, but I quickly realized he was planning to use me as entertainment for his guests. They arrived with professional camera equipment, treating our home like a set and me like a performer they could direct and manipulate. I had been expecting something like this, and I was prepared. Instead of retreating to my room or leaving the house as Marcus probably anticipated, I stayed in the living room and began asking his guests pointed questions about their content creation ethics, their relationships with their families, and their thoughts on consent and social media. The conversation was deeply uncomfortable for everyone except me. These young creators had never been challenged to think critically about the impact of their content on the people they featured. They had operated in an echo chamber where exploitation was normalized, and criticism was dismissed as generational misunderstanding. I recorded this entire interaction, capturing their discomfort as they tried to justify their practices, their inability to articulate why filming family members without consent was acceptable, their gradual realization that they might be participating in something unethical. Several of them left early, clearly disturbed by the conversation and unwilling to participate in whatever Marcus had planned. Marcus was furious. For the first time since I had discovered his content, he dropped his facade entirely and revealed the contempt he had been hiding behind his performance of filial affection. He screamed at me for embarrassing him in front of his collaborators, for sabotaging his content creation, for being an ungrateful burden who didn't appreciate his success. The mask had finally slipped completely, and I was recording every word. His tirade was a confession, an admission that he saw me as nothing more than a tool for his career advancement, a resource to be exploited, rather than a person deserving of respect. He detailed his frustration with my recent resistance to being filmed, his anger at my lack of cooperation with his content creation plans, his resentment that I expected to be treated like a human being rather than a prop. This recording became the centerpiece of my case against him. In his own words, Marcus had admitted to systematically exploiting me, to installing surveillance equipment in our home without my knowledge, to treating our relationship as a business opportunity rather than a family bond. He had confessed to everything I had suspected and documented, providing the smoking gun I needed for legal action. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. Instead, I began my own content creation campaign, but with a crucial difference. Where Marcus had exploited me without consent, I began sharing my story with full transparency about my intentions and complete control over my narrative. I started with a simple blog post on a platform Marcus didn't monitor, telling the story of discovering my son's exploitation and the impact it had on my mental health and sense of self-worth. I included screenshots of his content featuring me, excerpts from his forum posts about family exploitation strategies, and evidence of the revenue he had generated from my humiliation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments poured in from other parents who had experienced similar exploitation, from young people horrified by Marcus's behavior, from viewers who had unknowingly consumed content created through family abuse. Many people shared their own stories of being exploited by family members for social media content, creating a community of support I hadn't expected. The blog post was shared thousands of times across social media platforms, with many people expressing outrage at Marcus's behavior and admiration for my courage in speaking out. Several journalists reached out asking for interviews, and advocacy organizations focused on digital rights and elder abuse contacted me about using my case to highlight these issues. Marcus remained oblivious to this growing awareness of his behavior. He was so focused on his own platforms and audience that he didn't notice the broader conversation happening about family exploitation in content creation. He continued his normal routine, gaming and streaming, apparently confident that his mother would continue to be a reliable source of content and that any consequences for his behavior would be minimal. I let him maintain this illusion while I continued building my case and expanding my own platform. I accepted interview requests, sharing my story with increasingly large audiences and helping to raise awareness about the exploitation happening in family content creation. Each interview was an opportunity to educate people about consent, privacy rights, and the real human cost of entertainment that relied on family exploitation. The momentum was building faster than I had anticipated. Legal experts who had seen my story began offering pro bono assistance, recognizing that my case could set important precedents for protecting family members from content exploitation. Privacy advocates reached out with resources and strategies for holding platforms accountable for hosting non-consensual content. Several major media outlets picked up the story, framing it as part of a broader conversation about ethics in content creation and the responsibility of platforms to protect vulnerable people from exploitation. The narrative was shifting from individual family drama to systemic issues that needed industry-wide attention and regulation. Throughout this process, I maintained my documentation of Marcus's behavior. He had become increasingly erratic as his usual content strategies failed to generate the engagement he was accustomed to. Without easy access to my daily struggles and private moments, his content quality had declined noticeably, and his audience was beginning to lose interest. I watched him panic as his view counts dropped and his revenue streams diminished. He tried desperately to recreate the viral success of his earlier content, but without my unwitting participation, his material felt forced and artificial. His audience could sense the difference, and many began commenting that his recent content lacked the authenticity that had originally drawn them to his channel. The irony was profound. Marcus had built his success on exploiting my authenticity, my genuine reactions, my real struggles and vulnerabilities. When he could no longer access these elements without my consent, his content revealed itself to be hollow and manipulative. He was a mediocre creator whose apparent talent had always been dependent on his ability to exploit me. As his online career began to crumble, Marcus became increasingly desperate and dangerous. He started trying to provoke more dramatic reactions from me, escalating his manipulation tactics and becoming more aggressive in his attempts to create content. I documented all of this behavior, building a comprehensive record of his deteriorating mental state and increasingly concerning actions. The breakthrough came when Marcus made a critical error in judgment. Frustrated by his declining success and desperate to recreate his viral moments, he decided to stage a fake emergency involving me. He planned to film my reaction to a fabricated crisis, believing that capturing my genuine distress would restore his audience engagement and revenue. But I had been monitoring his private communications and was aware of his plan. Instead of falling for his manipulation, I set up my own recording equipment and documented his entire attempt to exploit my emotions for content. I captured him creating the fake emergency, rehearsing his performance, and attempting to manipulate me into reacting for his cameras. This footage became the evidence I needed to take definitive action. Marcus had crossed the line from exploitation to deliberate emotional abuse, and I finally had undeniable proof of his calculated cruelty. The recording showed him laughing about his plan to upset me, discussing strategies for maximizing my distress for content purposes, and treating my emotional well-being as completely disposable. I chose my moment carefully. Marcus had scheduled a major livestream event, promising his audience exclusive content and special announcements. He had been promoting this stream for weeks, desperate to recapture the attention and revenue his career had been hemorrhaging. He expected a large audience, and he got one, but not in the way he had anticipated. Instead of providing entertainment for his audience, Marcus found himself confronted with the consequences of his actions. I had coordinated with other parents who had been exploited by their children, and we launched a coordinated response that exposed the systematic nature of family exploitation in content creation. The live stream became a public reckoning. While Marcus tried to maintain his usual performance, his chat filled with messages from people who had seen my interviews, read my blog posts, and learned about his exploitation strategies. His audience confronted him directly about his treatment of me, demanding explanations for his behavior and expressing disgust at his actions. Marcus tried to deflect and minimize, using the same tactics he had always employed when confronted about his content. He claimed I was overreacting, that everything was consensual, that his audience was misunderstanding our relationship dynamic, but the evidence was too overwhelming, and his audience was no longer willing to accept his explanations. The stream devolved into chaos as more evidence of Marcus's behavior circulated online. Screenshots of his forum posts about family exploitation, recordings of his conversations about manipulating me for content, and testimonials from other creators he had coached in exploitation techniques all surfaced simultaneously. His sponsors began dropping him in real time as the scope of his behavior became clear. Platforms started removing his content that featured me without consent, and his monetization was suspended pending investigation. The career he had built on my exploitation crumbled live on camera, and his audience watched it happen with a mixture of satisfaction and horror. But the most devastating moment came when I appeared in his chat, not as his victim but as the architect of his downfall. I posted a simple message that linked to a comprehensive document detailing everything he had done, every law he had broken, every boundary he had violated. The evidence was methodical, overwhelming, and undeniable. Marcus realized in that moment that I had been planning this response for weeks, that every conversation we had shared recently had been recorded, that his mother had outmaneuvered him completely. The shock on his face was genuine and profound as he understood that I was no longer the compliant victim he had taken for granted. The legal consequences followed swiftly. Armed with months of evidence and supported by experienced attorneys, I filed multiple complaints against Marcus for privacy violations, elder abuse, fraud, and exploitation. The case was ironclad, built on his own admissions and documented through his own content creation. The financial implications were severe. Marcus was required to pay restitution for the revenue he had generated from my exploitation, return all merchandise featuring my image, and surrender the equipment he had purchased with money earned through my abuse. The monetary damages were substantial, representing years of systematic exploitation and violation of my rights. But beyond the legal and financial consequences, Marcus faced something more devastating: the complete collapse of his public persona and social standing. The content creation community largely turned against him, as other creators recognized that his behavior threatened the legitimacy of their entire industry. His friends and collaborators distanced themselves to avoid association with his scandal. The platforms where he had built his career implemented new policies specifically designed to prevent the kind of exploitation he had practiced. His case became a cautionary tale used in discussions about content creation ethics and family exploitation, ensuring that his behavior would have lasting consequences for his reputation and career prospects. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my narrative and my dignity. The story was no longer about Marcus's success built on my humiliation. It had become about my strength, my intelligence, my refusal to remain a victim when I discovered the truth about my exploitation. The woman who had been secretly filmed falling down the stairs, who had been turned into a meme and monetized without her knowledge, had transformed herself into an advocate, an educator, and a force for change in an industry that had normalized family exploitation. Marcus's attempt to livestream my downfall had backfired spectacularly. Instead, the world had watched his empire crumble, as his victim revealed herself to be far more formidable than he had ever imagined. He had taught me to see everything as potential content, and I had learned the lesson better than he had anticipated. In the end, the son who had live-streamed his mother's fall down the stairs discovered that she had been live-streaming his fall from grace. And unlike his content, mine told the truth. The aftermath of Marcus's public downfall brought unexpected challenges that I hadn't anticipated during my months of planning. While I had focused intensely on gathering evidence and exposing his exploitation, I hadn't fully prepared for the emotional complexity of watching my son's life completely unravel, even though he had earned every consequence that followed. The first week after his live stream collapse was eerily quiet in our house. Marcus retreated to his room, emerging only for brief trips to the kitchen, avoiding eye contact and speaking in monosyllables when absolutely necessary. The confident, manipulative content creator had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely shocked that his actions had consequences, that his mother possessed the intelligence and determination to fight back effectively. I found myself in the strange position of sharing a living space with someone who had systematically abused me, but who was now clearly struggling with the magnitude of his situation. The maternal instincts that had been exploited for so long hadn't simply disappeared, and I experienced moments of unwanted sympathy for the young man who had lost everything through his own choices. But these moments were quickly tempered by reminders of what he had done. I would walk past his room and hear him on phone calls with lawyers, frantically trying to find ways to minimize his legal exposure or restore his online presence. He spoke about me in these conversations with the same calculating tone he had always used, referring to the situation with my mother as if I were still a problem to be managed, rather than a person whose rights he had violated. The legal proceedings moved forward with impressive efficiency. My attorney, Rebecca Chen, was a specialist in digital rights and privacy law who had taken my case both for its legal merit and its potential to establish important precedents. She explained that Marcus's behavior represented a perfect storm of different legal violations that could result in significant criminal charges beyond the civil penalties we were pursuing. The hidden cameras throughout our house violated state surveillance laws, particularly because they had captured me in private moments, including while I was undressed or engaging in personal care activities. The monetization of this footage without my consent triggered additional violations related to exploitation and privacy rights. His systematic documentation of my private conversations potentially violated wiretapping statutes, and the financial gains from my exploitation could be prosecuted under elder abuse regulations. Rebecca was particularly interested in the forum posts where Marcus had taught other creators how to exploit their family members. This evidence suggested a pattern of behavior that went beyond individual family dysfunction into something approaching organized exploitation. The prosecution was exploring whether Marcus could be charged with conspiracy or with running an enterprise designed to facilitate abuse of vulnerable people. Meanwhile, the media attention continued to grow as more families came forward with similar stories. The case had sparked a broader conversation about the ethics of family content creation and the responsibility of platforms to protect people who appeared in videos without meaningful consent. Several major platforms announced policy changes specifically in response to the issues my case had highlighted. The financial investigation revealed the true scope of Marcus's exploitation. Forensic accountants working with Rebecca's team discovered that Marcus had earned over $400,000 directly from content featuring me over the past 2 years. This included not just ad revenue from his videos, but also sponsorship deals, merchandise sales, and subscription fees from his various platforms. More disturbing was the discovery that Marcus had been planning to expand his exploitation systematically. Documents found on his computer showed that he had been researching ways to involve me in more invasive content, including plans to film me during medical appointments, to document any future health crises I might experience, and to capture footage of me in situations where I would be particularly vulnerable or embarrassed. He had also been developing relationships with other content creators, specifically to share strategies for family exploitation. The forum where he had posted advice about filming family members without consent was just one part of a larger network of creators who specialized in this type of content. The investigation revealed that this network had been systematically targeting older family members, people with disabilities, and others who might be less likely to understand or resist their exploitation. The psychological evaluation that was ordered as part of the legal proceedings provided insights into Marcus's mindset that were both illuminating and disturbing. The forensic psychologist determined that Marcus exhibited significant narcissistic traits and showed a marked inability to empathize with others, particularly with people he perceived as less important than himself. The evaluation revealed that Marcus genuinely believed his success justified his methods, and that he saw criticism of his content as evidence that others simply didn't understand the entertainment industry. He expressed frustration that I had overreacted to being featured in his videos, and maintained that everything he had done was normal behavior for content creators of his generation. Most concerning was his complete inability to understand why filming me without consent was problematic. Even when confronted with evidence of the distress his actions had caused me, Marcus remained focused on the impact to his career, rather than acknowledging any harm he had inflicted on me. The psychologist noted that this suggested a fundamental lack of empathy that went beyond typical selfishness into potentially dangerous territory. The ripple effects of the case extended far beyond our family situation. Other platforms began implementing stricter policies about family content, requiring explicit consent from all people featured in videos, and providing mechanisms for family members to request removal of content featuring them. Several states introduced legislation specifically addressing family exploitation in social media content, using Marcus's case as an example of the kinds of abuse these laws were designed to prevent. The content creation community's response was mixed, but largely negative toward Marcus. While some creators defended his right to document his life and dismissed the controversy as generational misunderstanding, the majority recognized that his behavior threatened the legitimacy of their industry. Many prominent creators made public statements distancing themselves from family exploitation tactics and endorsing stricter ethical standards for content creation. Some of Marcus's former collaborators and friends reached out to me directly, expressing genuine shock at learning about his hidden cameras and systematic exploitation. Several of them admitted that they had noticed concerning aspects of his behavior, but had not understood the full scope of what was happening. A few offered to testify on my behalf, providing additional evidence about Marcus's planning and bragging about his exploitation strategies. The financial consequences for Marcus were severe and immediate. Beyond the restitution he was required to pay me, he faced additional penalties from the platforms where he had violated terms of service. His monetization was permanently disabled, his channels were demonetized or suspended, and he was banned from several major platforms entirely. The sponsors who had supported his content demanded refunds for payments they had made, arguing that they had been deceived about the nature of his content and the consent of people featured in it. Several threatened their own legal action against Marcus for the reputational damage his scandal had caused to their brands. The merchandise featuring my image was pulled from all sales platforms, and Marcus was required to destroy any remaining inventory at his own expense. The licensing deals he had negotiated for products featuring my likeness were voided, and he was required to pay damages for the unauthorized use of my image and voice. Perhaps most devastating to Marcus's long-term prospects was the impact on his personal relationships. Friends and dating partners learned about his treatment of me through the extensive media coverage, and many chose to distance themselves from someone who had demonstrated such calculated cruelty toward his own mother. His social circle collapsed, as people recognized that someone capable of systematically exploiting a family member might pose similar risks to other relationships. The extended family members who had previously admired Marcus's online success and financial independence were horrified to learn how he had achieved these things. Several relatives contacted me to express their support and their disgust at his behavior. Family gatherings and holidays became impossible, as Marcus found himself unwelcome at events where I would be present, and most family members made clear that they prioritized maintaining relationships with me over accommodating him. The professional consequences extended beyond content creation into other potential career paths. Background checks for traditional employment would reveal his legal troubles and the extensive media coverage of his exploitation activities. His digital footprint, once an asset that demonstrated his marketing and content creation skills, had become a liability that would follow him indefinitely. The criminal charges that were ultimately filed against Marcus included multiple felonies related to surveillance violations, privacy breaches, and elder abuse. The prosecution argued that his systematic exploitation of me constituted a pattern of criminal behavior that warranted significant penalties beyond civil restitution. The plea negotiations revealed just how serious his legal jeopardy had become. His attorneys struggled to find arguments that could minimize his exposure, particularly given the extensive documentation of his planning and intent. The forum posts where he had bragged about his exploitation techniques and coached others in similar behavior provided clear evidence of his knowledge that his actions were harmful and potentially illegal. Marcus's attempts to minimize his behavior during the legal proceedings only made his situation worse. His continued insistence that his actions were normal and justified demonstrated to prosecutors and judges that he posed an ongoing risk to vulnerable people and was unlikely to modify his behavior without significant legal intervention. The civil lawsuit proceeded simultaneously with the criminal case, and the damages continued to mount as the full scope of Marcus's exploitation became clear. Beyond the direct financial harm from his monetization of my image and private moments, I was awarded compensation for emotional distress, privacy violations, and the ongoing impact to my reputation and well-being. The precedent set by my case began influencing other similar situations across the country. Families who had experienced comparable exploitation found themselves with legal options they hadn't known existed, and attorneys began specializing in this emerging area of law. The case became required reading in law schools and was cited in academic papers about digital rights and family law. The therapeutic process of recovering from years of systematic exploitation proved to be more complex than I had anticipated. While achieving justice through the legal system was satisfying, it didn't immediately undo the psychological damage of learning that my own son had seen me as nothing more than a content source for most of our recent relationship. Working with a therapist who specialized in family trauma helped me understand how Marcus had systematically isolated me from support systems and manipulated my perceptions of our relationship. The gaslighting and emotional manipulation had been so subtle and consistent that I had internalized many of his narratives about my worth and capabilities. Recovery involved not just processing the betrayal and exploitation, but also rediscovering my sense of self outside of my role as Marcus's mother. For years, I had defined myself primarily through my relationship with him, and his rejection of that relationship had left me questioning my fundamental identity and value as a person. The support network that emerged from other families who had experienced similar exploitation became an unexpected source of strength and healing. These connections reminded me that Marcus's behavior was not a reflection of my failures as a mother, but rather evidence of his own character defects and moral choices. The advocacy work that grew out of my case provided a sense of purpose and meaning that helped counteract the isolation and shame I had experienced during the exploitation. Speaking at conferences, working with legislators on protective policies, and supporting other families facing similar situations transformed my painful experience into a force for positive change. The media attention, while initially overwhelming, created opportunities to educate people about consent, privacy rights, and the potential for abuse within family content creation. Each interview and public appearance was a chance to prevent other families from experiencing what Marcus had put me through. The long-term impact on my relationship with Marcus remained uncertain. While the legal proceedings would eventually conclude, the fundamental breach of trust and respect could not be easily repaired through court orders or financial settlements. Marcus had demonstrated through his actions that he was capable of systematic exploitation of people who loved and trusted him, and rebuilding any kind of relationship would require genuine acknowledgement of harm and sustained behavioral change that he had not yet demonstrated. The house we had shared became a constant reminder of the surveillance and exploitation I had endured. Every room contained memories of hidden cameras and secret recordings, and I ultimately decided that remaining in that space was incompatible with my healing and recovery. The financial settlement from Marcus's exploitation provided the resources to relocate to a new home where I could establish clear boundaries and privacy. The new living situation represented more than just a change of address. It was a physical manifestation of my reclaimed autonomy and my refusal to continue existing in spaces where my dignity and privacy had been systematically violated. Creating a new home environment where I had complete control over my privacy and security became an important part of rebuilding my sense of safety and self-determination. The career changes that followed were equally significant. The advocacy work that had emerged from my case evolved into consulting opportunities with platforms, legal organizations, and families dealing with similar issues. This work provided not just financial independence, but also a sense that my difficult experience was being transformed into something that could protect and empower others. The speaking engagements and media appearances led to opportunities to influence policy discussions at state and federal levels. Legislators working on digital rights and privacy protections sought my input on proposed regulations, and my case became a touchstone for discussions about protecting vulnerable people in the rapidly evolving landscape of social media content creation. The transformation from exploitation victim to advocate and policy influencer was profound and unexpected. The woman who had been secretly filmed falling downstairs and turned into viral entertainment had become a recognized expert on family exploitation and digital rights. Marcus's attempt to profit from my pain had ultimately resulted in my emergence as a powerful voice for change and protection. Looking back on the entire experience, I recognized that while Marcus had inflicted significant harm through his exploitation, he had also inadvertently taught me valuable lessons about my own strength, intelligence, and capacity for strategic thinking. The months of investigation, evidence gathering, and legal planning had revealed capabilities I hadn't known I possessed, and had prepared me for advocacy work I never could have imagined. The final irony was that Marcus, who had built his career on documenting other people's lives for entertainment, had become the subject of extensive documentation himself. Court records, media coverage, and academic analysis of his case created a permanent record of his exploitation activities that would follow him indefinitely. The man who had turned his mother's private moments into public entertainment discovered that his own behavior would be scrutinized and analyzed by strangers for years to come. The justice achieved through legal proceedings, media exposure, and social consequences was comprehensive but came at significant personal cost. While Marcus faced appropriate penalties for his actions, the fundamental relationship between mother and son had been damaged in ways that might never be fully repaired. The young boy I had raised and loved was gone, replaced by someone whose character had been revealed to be fundamentally incompatible with basic human decency and respect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.